Bones tardes. És un plaer introduir una entrevista que vàrem fer en el Noam Chomsky el 13 de maig del 2008. La UPEC, que com bé sabeu és la Universitat Progressista de l'Estiu de Catalunya, té com part de la seva vocació el crear un intercanvi entre persones d'esquerra, progressistes, de Catalunya, d'Espanya, d'Europa i del món. I per nosaltres era de molt interès saber què pensava Noam Chomsky sobre el que està passant aquests dies als Estats Units, Europa i el món. Noam Chomsky és una persona d'una enorme importància i quan s'escrigui la història intel·lectual del segle XX i XXI, Noam Chomsky tindrà un capítol molt important. Ha sigut la veu més crítica dintre dels Estats Units en quant no sols la política exterior d'aquell país, però també en quant a l'estructura de poder dels Estats Units. En aquest moment, els Estats Units està a la primera pàgina de totes les notícies. I, com sempre, els mitjans de comunicació controlen, canalitzen, manipulen, i és difícil saber què passa en un país tan complex com és els Estats Units. Aquesta complexitat dels Estats Units encara està més accentuada degut a l'enorme diferència de cultures polítiques entre aquell país i les cultures d'Europa, d'Espanya i Catalunya. D'aquí que es va decidir per part de l'equip directiu de l'UPEC d'invitar-lo per donar la lectura inaugural, la classe inaugural de les jornades d'aquest any. Ell no va poder vindre perquè la seva esposa està molt malalta, es va excusar. Ell coneix Catalunya. És més, té una gran simpatia i lligam emotiu en Catalunya perquè com a intel·lectual dels Estats Units va seguir molt de prop aquella guerra civil. Ens explicava que com jove ja es va sentir molt identificat en la causa republicana en contra del feixisme. Ara bé, l'entrevista no és sobre el passat, és sobre el present i sobre el futur. L'entrevista se centra sobre els Estats Units, què està passant als Estats Units, què és el fenomen Obama. És una promesa de canvi o és una construcció mediàtica? També volien saber la seva opinió sobre el que passa en Europa. I veureu que parla, i a vegades molt críticament d'Europa. I també volien saber la seva opinió sobre el món. Ell ha estat molt involucrat, és un dels punts de referència pel món antiglobalització i té també coses molt interessants a dir sobre el futur d'aquest moviment. Aleshores, aquestes 45 minuts d'entrevista i que jo he tingut el plaer de fer-la. Jo conec en Noam Chomsky per molts anys. En realitat som amics, molt amics. I des d'aquest punt de vista, ell va acceptar en unes condicions molt difícils, en una situació familiar, perquè estava disposat a través meu poder contactar aquest món de Catalunya i Espanya. Des d'aquest punt de vista, el Noam Chomsky és una persona super interessant, no sols com a intel·lectual, però també com a ser humà. És d'aquestes persones úniques que, a pesar del seu gran renom, és un home molt senzill, molt accessible i molt agradable. Anem passar unes hores molt agradables amb ell, fent l'entrevista després d'una manera informal. I, naturalment, es va comprometre que vindria i no renunciem a tindre'l entre nosaltres un any fent la conferència inaugural. Els temes que toca són temes que són rellevants per a nosaltres i d'enorme importància. A vegades serà difícil d'entendre perquè són termes i una narrativa diferent a la nostra. I al final jo faré algunes observacions en quant a mostrar la rellevància del que Noam Chomsky ha dit pel nostre país, que són molt pertinents perquè el que passa als Estats Units, en certa manera, és el futur nostre en el cas que no canviem. I el futur l'hem vist i a vegades no funciona. És des d'aquest punt de vista que d'una manera relaxada parlem. Ell em coneix a mi, coneix els meus treballs, els cita inclús en aquesta entrevista, però també en els seus. I, per exemple, fa referència la situació sanitària, que és molt preocupant, en el que a vegades no es capta que no hi ha un sistema que garantitzi l'accés als serveis sanitaris als Estats Units. En realitat, 100.000 persones moren l'any degut a la manca de serveis d'atenció sanitària. Aquest és un problema molt greu. Ell fa referència a aquest tema, fa referència a altres en els quals jo també he estat escrivint i treballant, i ell fa referència a això. Hi ha una amistat, hi ha una estima, hi ha una admiració mútua i que es reflexa en aquesta entrevista. Aleshores, ja sense més, introdueixo aquesta entrevista en el Noam Chomsky, que crec que tots coincidim és un dels intel·lectuals més importants dels temps que vivim. Well, Noam, thank you so much for welcoming us here.
Delighted to have a chance to talk to you.
Thanks. We're here as on behalf of the some Progressive University of Catalonia, as I mentioned to you, is intent of recovering the history of Catalonia, when workers and academics got together during the summer to be able to discuss things of the day. That was, of course, forbidden during the dictatorship. And then when, in 2003, the left-wing parties recovered government, they renew again this commitment. And that we wanted to have you there. You couldn't make it, but we still hope that you will be able to make it someday.
Hope so.
Good. I wanted to chat about you and also about the United States, because you are indeed the best-known intellectual abroad, and sometimes people outside the United States are not fully aware of what it means that the best-known intellectual of the United States abroad does not appear very frequently in the major media. So when we watch the TV, CBS, NBC, and the major channels, you are not there, and that many people do not realize that, because the United States is frequently idolized as extremely dynamic, active democracy, and they not fully realize how discriminated the left is within the United States. How do you respond to that? How do you explain that?
Well, I should say the place where I am most feared and despised is probably left liberal intellectual circles. Actually, if you want to see a graphic indication of this, you can take a photograph of one of my favorite newspaper journal covers, which is framed and posted right outside the door. It's the journal of, it's more or less the official journal of left liberal intellectuals, American Prospect, and the cover depicts the terrible circumstances in which they try to survive the enormous forces that are virtually destroying them. If you look at the picture, there are two figures depicted, two faces, sneering, angry. On one side is Dick Cheney and the Pentagon. On the other side is me. You know, they're caught between these two huge forces. That's indicative of the paranoia and the concern that there might be some small break in orthodoxy. The liberal intellectuals typically are it's not just in the United States, the kind of guardians at the gates. You can go this far, but not 1 millimeter farther. And it's terrifying to think that somebody might go a millimeter farther. And that extends over the major media too. So yes, it's a very free country. In fact, it's the freest country in the world. I don't think freedom of speech, for example, is protected anywhere in the world as much as it is here. But it's a very managed society. It's a business-run society, carefully managed, strict doctrinal requirements, no deviation from them, tolerated. It's too dangerous. One of the reasons it's too dangerous is that the political establishment, both political parties, the political class, on many major issues, they're well to the right of the population. Healthcare, for example, which you've written about for decades. The population is to the left of the establishment has been forever. And the same is true on many other issues. So permitting issues to be discussed is threatening, and permitting a deviation from kind of a party line is dangerous, has to be carefully controlled. So yes, a very free country, at the same time, very rigid ideology.
Yeah. But it's surprising because from outside, the impression that many of our European colleagues in academia see United States as a very sort of a stable political system. And in that respect, there was one thing that with such a powerful dominant class, one of the things they could afford, so having more freedom and having more critical voices in the media.
Well, God, ask your...
It's like they would be afraid of.
I think they are afraid. There's terrible fear. That photograph indicates it. And the fear is slight deviation may lead to disaster. It's a typical totalitarian mentality. You have to control everything. If anything is out of control, it's a disaster. And in fact, the stability of the society is not so obvious. So for example, if you, and that requires a lot of suppression. So take, say, the Pentagon Papers are quite interesting in this respect. These Pentagon Papers are not declassified documents. It's like stealing conquering a country and stealing its archives. You know, it wasn't intended for the public. And there are a few interesting things in it which are suppressed. The most interesting is the account at the very end of the Pentagon Papers. The period they cover ends in mid-1968, right after the Tet Offensive in January 1968, which convinced the business classes that the war is too costly, it's not worth pursuing. But those next few months, there was an attempt by the government to send an extra 200,000 troops to Vietnam, which would have raised it to practically 750,000. And there was a debate, and it's discussed there, and they decided not to do it. And the reason is that they feared that if they did, they would need the troops for civil disorder control in the United States, because there would be an uprising of unprecedented proportions among young people, women, minorities, the poor, and so on. They barely had it under control, and any move might have led to an uprising. Yeah. And it continues. You just cannot let the population out of control. They have to be tightly disciplined. One of the reasons for the extraordinary pressure of consumerism, this goes back to the 1920s, is the recognition by the business world that unless they atomize people, unless they drive them to what they called the superficial things of life, like fashionable consumption, the population may turn on them. I mean, right now, for example, about 80% of the population believes that the country, in their words, is run by a few big interests looking out for themselves, not for the benefit of the population. About 95% of the population thinks the government ought to pay attention to public opinion. The degree of alienation from institutions is enormous. But as long as people are atomized, worried about maxing out their credit cards, separated from one another, don't hear serious critical discussion, well, the idea is they can be controlled.
Sure. No, another thing that happens is also an idealization of the American system now with the primaries, that they have been shown as a sign of vitality of this democracy. And here you have or the Obama phenomena that in some way the masses are mobilized and putting him forward. That is so contrary to that reality, but how do you explain this idealization of the American political scene that is so common in Europe?
The people who have the illusions, you have to ask what's the source of their illusions, but it's clear what's happening. And the establishment understands it very well. So for example, there's one day, it's called Super Tuesday, February 5th. There's like a couple of dozen primaries, so big excitement. Take a look at the Wall Street Journal. It's a front page story on Super Tuesday. Big headline over the front page is issues recede in 2008 election. Voters prefer character. Well, issues didn't actually recede because they were never there. They're carefully kept out of sight by the party managers. But it's true that they're in the background. And it's not that voters prefer character. Voters would be perfectly happy to vote for the national health care system that they wanted for decades. It's just that those things aren't options. The party managers, we're basically the public relations industry that sells commodities on television. They market candidates the same way they market commodities. You see an ad on television, you don't expect to learn anything from it. If we had a free market, General Motors would post on television the characteristics of the cars they're selling. And they don't do that. And what they do is try to create illusions, complicated graphics, a famous actress driving up to heaven or something like that. The point is to delude and marginalize the public. When you market candidates, it's the same thing. You want to keep away from issues. Too dangerous. The public doesn't agree with you on issues. So what you have is character, trivialities, personal issues. Did his pastor say something? Did Clinton make a mistake when she talked about Bosnia? You know, anything but the issues. So the population just doesn't know what the issues are. And this is popular opinion in the United States is very well studied, mainly because the business classes who run the country want to have their finger on the public pulse. If you're going to control and propagandize, if you're going to control people's attitudes and opinions, you have to know a lot about them. So we know a lot about public opinion. And say in the last election, 2004, I think about 10% of Bush voters even knew his positions on anything. Not because they're stupid or uninterested, but because the elections are a marketing system. It's a business-run society. You market commodities, you market candidates. The public are the victims, and they know it. That's why 80% think, more or less accurately, that the country is run by a few big interests looking out for themselves. So they're not deluded, they just don't really see any choices. Now the Obama phenomenon is an interesting reaction to this. Obama's handlers, the campaign managers, have created an image which is essentially a blank slate. The Obama campaign is, the words are hope, change, unity, kind of totally vacuous slogans, said by a nice person, looks good, talks nice. And you can write anything you like on that blank slate. And a lot of people are writing on it their hopes for progressive change. No basis for it in the campaign. As the Wall Street Journal correctly said, issues recede. It's character that's up front. But yes, it is a popular phenomenon, and I think it reflects the alienation of the population from the institutions. They're grasping at a straw. Here's a possibility that maybe